The handkerchief hit the floor at the quietest moment of the entire night. I heard it before I saw it. A small sound, almost nothing. A square of faded blue silk landing on polished hardwood, embroidered with tiny flowers and 2 initials in the corner. It slipped from my hand when I stepped back, after the music stopped, after everything. And the man who picked it up from the floor looked at it like he was seeing a ghost. But that's the end. Let me tell you the beginning. My name is Maya Ferreira. I'm 32 years old, and I live in a 1-room apartment on the south side of Chicago that fits exactly 1 bed, 1 dresser, and the quiet understanding that things will get better eventually. That's not a complaint. It's just the reality of someone who works whatever's available to cover whatever's due. Some mornings I'm loading freight at a warehouse on the near west side. Some afternoons I'm delivering packages for one of those apps where the algorithm decides your route and doesn't care that you've been on your feet for 6 hours. Some nights, when the regular work doesn't stretch far enough, I pick up cleaning shifts at commercial buildings downtown. Honest work, exhausting work. Work that taught me how to be invisible in any room. That skill, invisibility, is what got me the night shifts at the Grand Meridian. The Grand Meridian sits on Michigan Avenue and is the kind of place that makes you feel small just walking past it on the sidewalk. Marble floors, chandeliers that probably weigh more than my rent, doormen who smile with their mouths, but not their eyes. I use the service entrance. For large events, they bring in extra staff to handle the floor. A friend put in my name. The banquet manager tested me at a smaller function and said, "You know how to stay out of the way." Hired. Stay out of the way. Translation: don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact. Disappear between one glass and the next. I'd been doing that my whole life. In rooms like this, invisibility isn't humiliation. It's just how you survive. That night was the annual gala for the Whitmore Group, a real estate development firm celebrating 30 years in business. 400 guests, a live orchestra, centerpieces that looked like small forests, women in gowns that caught the light like they were built from it, men in suits that cost more than my car. I moved through all of it with my tray, refilling glasses, clearing plates, keeping my smile polite and my presence minimal. That's when I noticed her. She was in the corner of the VIP section, near a marble column, alone. Dark navy dress, floor length, simpler than everything else in that room. Posture closed, shoulders slightly curved, chin low, hands locked together in her lap like she was holding herself in place. What caught my attention first wasn't the scar. It was the look on her face. She was physically present, but somewhere else entirely. That particular expression of someone who has learned to exist without taking up space. I recognized it. I'd worn it myself. The scar came into focus when I moved closer to clear a glass near her table. A thick line running from her left temple down toward her jaw, raised slightly against pale skin, catching the chandelier light in a way she clearly hadn't chosen and couldn't control. It wasn't fresh. It was an old scar that had learned to stay, even if its owner hadn't yet learned to let it. From the seating chart the manager had distributed before the event, I knew the name. Isla Whitmore, 24 years old, daughter of Richard Whitmore, the founder whose name was on the invitation, on the banner over the stage, on the building across the street. Richard was at the head table, shaking hands, working the room the way men like him do at events like this. But every few minutes his eyes traveled to that corner by the column. Not the look of a businessman surveying his guests, the look of a father who doesn't know how to help. I was passing near a group of young men by the bar when I heard it. Voices low enough to seem discreet, loud enough to carry exactly where they were meant to carry. She should have stayed home. All that money and he couldn't fix that. Who's going to ask her to dance? Laughter. I stopped moving. I turned slightly toward Isla. She had heard. I knew because her knuckles had gone white in her lap, and she was blinking fast in that particular way that holds tears in without letting them fall. She didn't stand, didn't react. Maybe she already knew that reacting only made it worse, that standing up just drew the spotlight to the thing she was trying not to be defined by. The orchestra shifted into a slow waltz. Couples moved toward the dance floor, the ballroom filled with the easy motion of people who had nothing to hide, and something in me decided, before my brain could overrule it. I set my tray on a stand, straightened my vest, breathed, and walked toward her. I felt the shift in the room as I crossed it. The server stepping out of her lane. What is she doing? I kept walking. Isla didn't look up right away. I stopped at a respectful distance, hands behind my back, and spoke quietly, just loud enough for her. Are you doing okay tonight? She raised her head slowly. Her eyes were hazel, deep, shadowed by a tiredness that wasn't from one night. She looked at me the way someone looks at a stranger whose attention they've learned to brace for. Curiosity, pity, or something worse. You're the server, she said softly. Yes, I said, without looking away. And if you say no, I'll apologize and go back to work. But if you say yes, it would be an honor. She frowned slightly. It took her a second to understand what I was offering. You won't get in trouble? She asked. You won't, I said. You're sitting alone in a room where you shouldn't have to be alone. Something shifted in her face at that. Her lips parted slightly. Her eyes blinked faster. She looked at the dance floor, back at me. She searched my face for the joke, the hidden camera, the angle. She didn't find one. Slowly, she placed her hand in mine. Her hand was cold and trembling, but she didn't pull it back. I led her to the edge of the dance floor, away from the center, but not hidden. The music was a slow waltz, the strings opening gently. I placed one hand lightly on her back, kept appropriate distance, and began to move. Simple steps, nothing elaborate. She was rigid at first, like someone who had forgotten how their own body moves when it isn't defending itself. Eyes fixed on the floor. Look at me, I said, barely above a whisper. Not at them. Just at me. She looked up, and I saw everything at once. Not just the exhaustion, the layers underneath. The weight of carrying something visible that the world refuses to stop commenting on. The specific loneliness of being the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. I didn't look away. I kept guiding her, one step at a time, and felt her shoulders drop slightly. The rigidity giving way millimeter by millimeter. After a few minutes, her hand relaxed in mine. And then, almost impossibly, a small smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Fragile as early morning light, but real. The scar caught the chandelier light as we turned, and in that moment it didn't look like damage. It looked like part of a story she had survived. When the music faded, I stepped back carefully, ready to return to my tray. That's when the handkerchief slipped from the inner pocket of my vest and landed on the hardwood with a soft sound. A square of faded blue silk, embroidered with small flowers. 2 initials in the corner. L.W. Richard Whitmore took 2 steps toward us, his eyes fixed on the fabric on the floor. He bent down and picked it up with hands that weren't entirely steady. Turned it over between his fingers, tracing the embroidery the way you trace something you thought you'd never see again. Where did you get this? He said, and his voice was different now. Not the voice of the man who had been working the room all evening. Something older, more exposed. I went still. I knew immediately. This was no longer just mine to carry. My name is Maya Ferreira, I said, keeping my voice steady. I served with your sister, Laura Whitmore. Richard closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, they were wet. Isla moved close, her hand on her father's arm, her own eyes wide. Dad. He looked between us, still holding the handkerchief. My mother made this for her before she deployed. he said, his voice breaking on the last word. Laura never came back. The reports were vague. They said it was fast, that she was brave. But I never knew if she was alone. I joined the army at 19. Not out of patriotism exactly, out of options. I grew up in South Chicago, no father in the picture, a mother who worked 2 jobs and still came up short most months. The military offered structure, a salary, and the possibility of something beyond the neighborhood I already knew every corner of. Laura Whitmore was a staff sergeant 2 years ahead of me. She was the kind of person you follow not because of rank, but because she made you feel like the ground was solid under your feet when nothing else was. Calm in chaos. Decisive, without being cruel. On a routine patrol in a remote area of Afghanistan, the lead vehicle hit an IED on a dirt road that had been compromised by flash flooding the night before. It went up in seconds. I was in the second vehicle. I got out, but I went down in the mud, my leg pinned under the door frame that had caved in on impact. Smoke everywhere, the heat from the burning truck pressing against my face. Laura didn't hesitate. She pulled me free with her own hands, dragged me behind a concrete barrier, wrapped this handkerchief around my wrists where I was bleeding, told me to stay, went back for the driver. She didn't come out. I was still behind that barrier when the second explosion went, still holding the handkerchief she had tied around my wrists. I carried it from that day forward, as a debt, as a promise that someday I would find her family and tell them what happened, that she wasn't alone, that it meant something. But after I was discharged, life moved fast and hard. Jobs, cities, years. Chicago swallowed me whole, and I kept putting off the thing I knew I needed to do. Until that night. Richard was crying without trying to hide it. Not the controlled emotion of a man who runs boardrooms. The raw grief of a brother who had carried a question for over a decade and was finally hearing the answer. I knelt to his level and spoke quietly but clearly. She wasn't alone. I was there until the end. She said your name. She told me to tell you not to blame yourself, to live with kindness for both of you. Those were her exact words. She was at peace. Richard pressed his hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking without sound. Isla was kneeling beside him, one arm around his back, her own eyes bright. She looked at me differently now, not as the server who had asked her to dance, but as someone who had been carrying a piece of her family's story, without either of them knowing. The ballroom had gone completely still. The orchestra had stopped. The conversations had died. Richard stood slowly, the handkerchief pressed against his chest. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, straightened his jacket, and then he turned to face the room. He walked directly to the group of young men by the bar. "I heard what you said about my daughter tonight," he began, his voice quiet and heavy at the same time. Their confidence evaporated visibly. One of them opened his mouth. Richard didn't give him room. "You called her broken. You laughed at the pain she carries from surviving something none of you would have the courage to face." He gestured once toward the door. Security. 2 men appeared from the edges of the room. The group was escorted out without drama, the door closing behind them with a finality that echoed across the marble. Richard didn't stop there. He turned to a cluster of women on the other side of the room, the ones whose whispered sympathy had floated through the air earlier, that particular brand of pity that humiliates more thoroughly than cruelty. "You spoke about my daughter like she was a flawed display piece, something to be discussed over drinks. I heard every word." Several of them looked away. One pressed a napkin to the corner of her eye. Then Richard turned to face the entire room, his voice carrying without needing to be raised. "Tonight, in a ballroom full of wealth and power, the only person who treated my daughter like a human being was the woman serving your drinks. She chose decency when every single one of you chose silence. That is worth more than anything I have built in 30 years. The words landed hard. I felt heat rise in my face. I hadn't done it for this. I hadn't done it to be seen. But then Isla stepped forward, straighter than I had seen her all evening, shoulders open, chin up. Her voice started soft and gathered weight with every word. For 3 years, since the accident that left me with this, she touched the scar without flinching. I let it define everything. I hid. I convinced myself it was safer not to be seen, that taking up space would only make things worse. She paused, looking out at the faces around her. Tonight, someone looked me in the eye. Not at the scar. At me. And because of that, I stood up. The room held its breath. Then the applause started. Not the polished applause of a formal toast, the kind that happens when people are caught off guard by something true and don't know what to do except acknowledge it. The evening wound down slowly after that. Guests left in smaller, quieter groups. The orchestra returned to soft background music, almost to itself. The ballroom that had felt pressurized all night began to breathe. I went back to work, cleared tables, collected glasses, tried to become invisible again. Richard found me near the stage before I could disappear entirely. He still held the handkerchief, folded carefully in his palm. He made me an offer, a position at the Whitmore Group, entry level, full training, relocation assistance if I needed it. I listened to all of it. Then I thanked him and said no. He studied me for a moment, without offense. Then tell me what you actually want, he said. I have a goal, I said. An accounting certificate. I want to open a small practice eventually. Nothing big. Just mine. He nodded. No obligation then. Just the program. Consider it a family debt being settled. Laura saved your life. You gave us a closing. Let me do this much. I stood with that for a moment. Pride and common sense had a brief argument. Common sense won. I extended my hand. He shook it firmly. You brought my sister home tonight, he said, in a way I didn't think was possible anymore. I shook my head. I'm the one who survived because she went back. That was never mine to keep forever. She appeared when Richard stepped away to speak with the hotel manager. She had removed a few pieces of jewelry. Her hair was a little looser. She looked less like the CEO's daughter and more like herself, whoever that was, the version the world rarely got to see. She stood 2 feet away from me for a moment, not closing the distance right away. I don't know how to properly thank you, she said. Her voice was soft, but steadier than it had been all night. You don't have to, I said. You just need to stop sitting in corners. She laughed. A small, genuine sound that cut through the remaining quiet of the ballroom in a way that surprised me. Easier said than done, she said. But tonight it feels possible. We were quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable silence of 2 strangers with nothing to say. The other kind. The kind that appears when 2 people realize at the same time that they aren't quite as strange to each other as they should be. She looked at me with something I couldn't fully name. Gratitude, yes, but something underneath it. Something more uncertain and more honest. If you're ever free, she said carefully, choosing the words with visible deliberateness. Maybe in a few days. I'd like to buy you coffee. Not here. Somewhere normal. Just to talk. It wasn't pity. It wasn't obligation. It was one woman asking for another woman's time, and being honest about wanting it. I was going to say yes. But before I could, the last violinist in the orchestra tested a few notes, a slow, improvised melody drifting through the nearly empty ballroom, and Isla tilted her head slightly to the side. One more dance, she said. There was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. To end the night properly. I offered my hand. This time without a room watching. Without anything to prove. She took it, and the way she held it was different from before. Warmer. Less tentative. Like something that had decided to be what it was. We moved slowly through the empty ballroom. The low golden light reduced to a soft glow, the violinist's melody wrapping around us without hurry. She wasn't rigid this time. Her steps were steady. Her body relaxed against my arm. Her head tilted slightly in my direction. The scar caught the light occasionally as we turned. I didn't look away. She noticed. "You never look away," she said quietly. Not as a question. "There's no reason to," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Most people think they're being kind when they pretend not to see it." I said, "Pretending not to see something isn't kindness. It's absence." She stopped dancing. We stood still in the middle of the empty ballroom, the music continuing softly around us, the chandeliers almost dark, the marble cool beneath our feet. She looked at me up close, her hazel eyes in the low light, a question in them she hadn't said out loud yet. I moved 1 inch closer. She didn't step back. The kiss was slow. Gentle as the music still playing around us, the kind of thing that happens when two people stop resisting at the same moment. Her lips were cool from the water glass she'd been holding all evening. When we separated, her eyes stayed closed for a second. When she opened them, she smiled. Not the fragile smile from earlier in the night, the full one. Richard found us like that, standing in the middle of the empty ballroom, holding hands, while the last violinist packed his instrument into its case. He looked at us for a moment. Then he folded the handkerchief carefully and placed it in the breast pocket of his jacket, and walked away without a word, with a slight smile on his face. When I left the Grand Meridian that night through the service entrance, Michigan Avenue was empty and cold, a light rain misting down from a sky the color of pewter. I didn't have the handkerchief anymore, but I had Isla's number in my phone, and the quiet certainty that carrying something for a long time sometimes takes you exactly where you were always supposed to end up.